raise your hand. If anybody wants to take an empty seat, find a raised hand and go sit next to them. We do have a full house tonight. There are 300 seats, and it looks like there's going to be people standing as well. So my name is Andy Dunn. I'm with RH2 Engineering. I'm going to be getting things kicked off tonight. We have a full schedule of presenters. We're going to start at 4:30. We're going to end our presentations about 6:15, at which time we're going to break into a question and answer panel until about 7 o'clock. We have to be out and cleaned up by 7:30. So any assistance putting chairs away after we're done talking would be appreciated. All right, logistics. So first of all, the consultants and us would like to thank the Ag Water Board for helping us put this on, and then also the Whatcom Watershed Information Network. Wouldn't have been possible without their help and assistance with coordination, mailers, getting the information out. Fantastic turnout. We were really excited to see this many people coming to hear on this topic. And the intent of our presentation is to inform. We're not here to debate whether the adjudication is good or bad. We are coming from the assumption the adjudication is going to happen. What can you as potential water right holders or well owners, what can you do to prepare for that in advance? Well, we ask that everyone be respectful. We shouldn't have to ask that, but we just want to make sure that we're respectful, professional during this. We are going to ask that all questions be saved until the end when we will have the panel and we'll open up for questions. There are also people stationed at the consultants' tables and an ecology's table in the back. If you do have a question that you want to ask somebody privately, you can ask those questions back there. This presentation is going to be recorded. The recording is going to focus on the presenter and the screen. It will not pan to the audience. We are going to assume that any question asked is a question that you received from your neighbor, and it's a hypothetical. So don't feel like, if you ask a question, you're going to get strung up for it or anything. So we are going to do our best to answer. Obviously, the adjudication hasn't been filed. The rules haven't been established yet. So we're just going based on our best estimate. Each one of us up here has more than 20 years experience working in water rights. So our experience in Washington State is what we're going to try to inform you on and provide you hopefully with answers and information that will help you get ready for the process. The presentation will also be made available, I believe, on the WIRA website, the WWIN website, and other locations. So all this information will be available. If you missed something, had to leave early, had friends that come attend. We prepared this slide before. We said if this is successful, we will do a future. We will do more of these in the future. Based on the turnout, we are anticipating that. So we want to hear from you what you want to know or what you're interested in for future presentations. We can dial in on different topics. We're thinking, I don't know if it's monthly, every other month or something. The consultants or some of them would come up and give a presentation, potentially to a smaller group or a more specialized group of folks if they're interested in a particular topic. So like I said, 7:30 is lights out, so 7 o'clock we're going to cut everything off so that we have time to clean everything up and get on out of here. So again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope you learn lots. It's going to be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose here for the next hour and change, but then we hope that it's informative to you in every way. All right. So first is Robin McPherson.
Thank you. My name is Robin McPherson, and I'm here from the Department of Ecology. And I'm really glad everybody is here to listen and ask questions and learn more about what's going on with this adjudication. I'm going to take a minute to talk to you about what adjudication is. They've given me 10 minutes here. I'm going to go through things quickly and then tell you about some important follow-up. Adjudication is a superior court process to review water use. It will occur in Whatcom County Superior Court in front of an elected Whatcom County Superior Court judge. It is going to clarify who has the legal right to use water. It is not going to change existing rights. It is going to clarify who is using water, who is already out there using water, so that the regulator, the state, the federal government, and other policymakers can understand where the water use is happening. A big piece of this is going to end up being about future water use. When we talk about future water use, it's really important for us to know who is already there. A lot of people who have called me say they've been there for a very long time. They've been using water since their parents or grandparents have been on the property. This is the chance for us to record that information and protect that water use for the future. If you do not already have any record of your water use, but you've been using water legally on the property, we would like to have a record of that, so that in the coming years, nobody can come on the property and say you're new if you say you've been there for a long time. The legislature of the state of Washington has directed us to do this. The Department of Ecology is an agency of the state of Washington, and we have funding and direction from the majority of the legislature to do this. The authority to do this is in RCW 9003, gives us the legal authority to review water use. The court, at the culmination of this process, will issue a priority schedule. Priority means old to new. This is the law of water in the entire west of the United States. First in time is first in right. It protects prior water users against their neighbors coming in and taking water that they have already used. At the end of the adjudication, Ecology will issue new adjudicated certificates. Whether you have an old water right, an old claim from your parents or grandparents, or whether you've never had a water right document before, Ecology will issue a certificate that will indicate your amount of legal water use. This is the area of the adjudication. We call it Water Resource Inventory Area 1. It includes Ferndale, where we're standing now, with the beautiful pink flower baskets. So if City of Ferndale is here, thank you for those. It's roughly Whatcom County, but you can see that it follows the watershed boundary, not the county line. It therefore includes a little bit of Skagit County at the bottom, and it omits some areas of Whatcom County. Other than that, the Water Resource Inventory Area includes the entire watershed. We call it the Nooksack watershed, but this is not only limited to the Nooksack Forks drainage and tributaries. It's this entire area in orange. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of the adjudication. The first thing I want to say is that if you only use water from a city service or as a customer of a service, this does not affect you. Your city has a water right, and that water right will be adjudicated. But if you only have water that comes on your property from a line, from a city, this does not affect you. So I guess half of you aren't going to stand up and leave, so that means at least we've communicated that much well so far. We are going to notify water users by certified mail next spring. There is a lot of time for us to continue educating, outreach, and helping people understand this. We're here, honestly, a little early in the season now because of Whatcom Water Week. And so we have a long lead into this time frame. We will file in court and we will send certified mail. When you receive the certified mail, it will have directions in it. And you can fill out the form about your water use and submit it to the court. You will have 1 year to do this. Now, maybe you'll be like me when I left Olympia this morning and I thought, I've got 7 hours to get to Ferndale. I can take my time and stop for lunch. Well, guess what happens when you do that? Sometimes it ends up taking a little longer than you thought. Thank you, Seattle construction. And you end up maybe not being here as early as Andy hoped you were going to be here. But that's the main thing about having a year to do it, is to not lose it, not end up running late at the end. I'm kind of joking about that, but the main point is you will have a year. We will have resources at the state and at the county, and we'll have more things like this to help people understand what needs to be done to turn their form in. The form can be completed online, but it does not have to be. It'll be a paper form you can send in. After that year, when we get those forms, we will let you know if we need more information about your water use. And that will be a long process where we will be reviewing individual water use if we need more information. For most water use, especially a single home on a well, we won't need more information. We might need to look and be sure there's a house there, but that's probably all that we'll need. We would like you to tell us that your house is there. We would like you to tell us how long it's been there. But beyond that, we probably don't need any more information. If there's something, a complicated farming operation, multiple overlapping water rights, things that have changed over the years, that's a case where ecology would want more information. After that, the law tells us to write a report about the water use, and anyone can object to that report. You can object to your report and say, no way, you got it wrong. You can object to your neighbor's report and say you got theirs wrong. And then the court will look at that and make a final decision. Your local superior court judge will make that decision. At the very end of that process, we will issue adjudicated water right certificates. We're designing this process to be possible to do without attorneys. This is a process that the law says a judge is responsible for, so it is in court. But we are working with some specialists in forms for unrepresented parties to make it as simple as possible for someone to do without an attorney. I'd never tell you don't call an attorney, because I don't know what your specific situation is and whether it might be complicated. We're going to have a separate training here for attorneys in January so that your local lawyers in Ferndale, Bellingham, and Linden can get up to speed. We're going to give them a free water training from the local bar association, and that will improve the kinds of lawyers that are available to ask you questions, to answer your questions. So how do you get ready for adjudication? This is early yet to get ready, but we know that people are interested in what to be done next. There's 2 bullets here. The first one says, go to our website and find out if we have a record of your water right. This is what these fine people are going to be talking a lot about too, by the way. Permit exempt groundwater will not have a record. That's okay. If you have a well that is subject to the permit exemption, it's not going to be in our database. We do want to have a record of it so that we know how long you've been there, so that you are protected as a current user. The second thing on this bullet is learn how much water you use from your pump or well. There are different ways you can do this. You can have a meter, maybe you do. Maybe you don't. If you don't have a meter, you're going to need to be able to estimate your water use. Now, they'll be talking a lot about this, and they can make it sound pretty tricky. I saw some slides with the word polygon on it. And I think I told you to not say polygon, but a square is a polygon. It's just a simple 4-sided polygon. If you know where you use the water and how much of it, you can do math to figure out the estimate of the water use. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. This has a little more information about filing a claim on it. This is more complicated than we need today, but I'm going to go through it so that we can see it in the long term about where this is eventually going. We have a proposal for small domestic wells at 500 gallons per day or less to make it as simple as possible. That's going to have an acreage limitation for this process. If you have more than this, that's fine. It just means you might use a bigger form. So this short form is going to have less on it to be less confusing. We'll have a shorter form that only asks you about the house. It won't ask you about your farm. It won't ask you about your mining operation because that would be confusing. It won't ask you about your water system plan because you're not a city. It will just keep it focused. Date of first use. Verify the purpose. Yes, my name is Robin. I use a well for a home. We are going to use these for adjudicated certificates for 500 gallons per day each. This is what we're going to propose to the court. That's a single home on a well. Single home as defined by the county, so like an ADU I think is with a single home. Okay, other permit exempt wells. It is fine if you have a permit exempt well. Usually we call this the 5,000 gallon per day exemption. We will also need the date of first use, your current use, your highest use. This is what the law tells us we have to do. Those will get adjudicated certificates for actual use. So if you've always used 5,000 from that well, that's what your certificate would say. You say, I've used 5,000 gallons every season since 1970. It would say 1970, 5,000 gallons. There is no limit for stock water. That's a little more complicated, but we would like stock water certificates to be accurate. So if you use 10 or 20 for stock, you could get an adjudicated certificate at the end of this process that has that number on it. The other category are documented rights. You might have a certificate for water use on your property. This is what they will tell you how to look up your document. Sometimes these are called permit certificates, pre-code claims. This is surface water, this is groundwater. These rights will need to affirm their current use and their highest use. And they will be able to get adjudicated certificates for the actual historic use. If you've read water right paper a lot, it often was written in pretty high at the time, and the use over time is not that full use. The adjudicated certificate will have the actual full use. So, filing a claim. Send in your form within 1 year. If you lose it, we'll get you another one. If you forget, we'll remind you. We really want to talk to people. We already have a phone number list and to call people and give them more information. This can be filed online or on paper. You can amend it later if the evidence is different. If you say, well, I only had a year, so I guessed. And then once I really went out and looked, it was different. That's fine. We want it to be accurate. What is proof? I've had a lot of inquiries about how do I prove something. Personal knowledge is the most immediate form of proof. Your word is your proof. You say that you've been there for a certain amount of years and you've used a certain amount of water and you sign it. Thank you. That is good evidence. Now, there might be other information that is useful to have. Maybe you haven't always owned this property. You'll need to look at some old documents. Ecology has a lot of records. The county has a lot of records. There are records of water use. These folks will tell you a lot about this. We do not have plans to visit or go onto private property to do investigations. We do the highest percentage of our investigations just from our desks, looking at the county records and saying, is there a house here? Okay, now we know. Sometimes if they say there's a house there, the county doesn't show a house there. Maybe we'll drive by and then maybe we'll call and say, you say there's a house, this really looks like forest and it's not even zoned for a house. Those are the kind of conversations that we'll be having. We do not enter private property without asking for these investigations. And so again, I said get ready, which is go to our website and find out if you have a record of a water right, learn how much water you use from your pump or well. That's really the starting point. Before that starting point though, I want to say that we want to have more conversations like this, and we're not going to be able to answer your conversations today. So please, in the back, Abby, I don't know, Abby, can you wave? There's Abby back there behind the crowd. Especially if you would like a smaller conversation where we can get into detail. A lot of you I might have spoken to before, either at the community center, at the Fisheries Association, at the Realtors. This is part of our job, is to come in and talk about this. So please, if you sign in, put a star by your name or tell us, please come talk to our group. We can sit down and do a full 2 hours just with the ecology Q&A. And I would really like to do that, especially of groups that all have something in common. If you're all farm or if you're all private well, same interest, then we can get into those details. So this is the information with our website. We have a thing you can do on the website where you put your name in for a listserv, then you will get updates, and that will give you the best new information on there. We also have QR codes. If that doesn't work, we got it in the back, so you can zap it there. So that is what I've got. I want to keep moving on because everybody here has prepared a lot of information for this, and I will be around as much as I can to answer questions after. Thank you, everybody.
Are you going to share the PowerPoint?
They want to know if we're sharing.
Yes.
Yes, we are. Great, hello everybody. I'm Jill Van Hooley with Aspect Consulting, and I have got the task of talking a little bit about Water Rights 101 and to provide folks with a little bit of an introduction. When we're talking about adjudication and talking about water rights, what do we mean? So at its simplest, a water right is the right to use a beneficial quantity of water, public water, for a beneficial use during a certain period of time and at a certain place. So a water right defines how much water you can use. And that authorization has got distinct attributes. It tells you how many gallons a minute or cubic feet per second can you take, how much water on a volumetric basis can you take a year, what can you use that water for, and where can you use it, which would be your place of use, or if you're a water system, your service area. So this water right has got boundaries on it. There are different types of water rights, and we mix and match these a little bit depending on if you're a lumper or a splitter. But in general, there's really two different kinds of water rights. So one are what we call state-issued water rights. So these are water rights that are issued based on Washington's water code, which I'll give you the citations in a minute, but Surface Water Code in the state of Washington, 1917, that's at the point where people started to need to document and to get water rights, and that was extended in 1945 to groundwater. So folks that have developed water through that mechanism will have initially what's called a water right permit, which is an authorization to develop water, and then finally a water right certificate, which documents that water right and to the extent that which water was developed. And there's other kinds of water rights. So we talk some about claims. Claims are basically a statement that are filed that folks think that they have a water use that is grandfathered in or developed before 1917 or 1945. So these are pre-code claims. There's a lot of them out there. There's an interesting variation called a short form claim that we'll talk about in a minute, but for the most part, claims are statements that haven't been looked at by ecology that are floating out there. And the final type of water use is permit exempt uses. And as Robin mentioned, these are not documented by paper, but people who have developed water under the state's groundwater exemption have the same right to water as anybody else. They have the same protections, and they also have the same obligations to not interfere with other people's water use. So just statewide, just to kind of get a handle on it. So when I say legal water rights, I mean water rights that were issued, based on the water code. There's 53,000 of those. 50,000 of those are certificates. 3,000 are permits that are still being developed. claims, I mentioned there were a lot of them. There's 170,000 claims, both ground and surface water statements that have never really been evaluated by anybody, that are just kind of hanging out there, that could be water rights. Permit exempt wells. In the state we have over 400,000 permit exempt wells that again are potentially legal water rights. And then for WWIN, just relative numbers, we expect ecology to issue about 25,000 statements to people to ask them to participate in this process. So, and then the Nook stack that we talked about, which is Water Resource Inventory Area 1. For the state issued water rights, there's over 5,000. So of those 25,000, 5,000 are going to go out to people that have, formal water right permits or certificates, and the rest are going to be exempt users. So people always like to talk about and ask, kind of who owns the water. In Washington, water is owned in common by the people. This is boiled right into our state constitution. The access to that water is managed by the state through the permit system. So, we don't own the water under our property, but we may own the right to use it. And there's a great word for it that I'm going to teach you guys. It's a usufructuary water use, which you should say under your breath and work it into conversations, because it's the legal term for being able to enjoy a benefit, a legal benefit to something that you don't necessarily own, and that's what water rights are. So 1917 RCW 9003 is our surface water code, and then in 1945 they basically said everything that applies to surface water also applies to groundwater, with the exception of an exemption that was developed. And in Washington, we are a prior appropriation state, so first in time, first in right is super important, which is part of the goal of this adjudication, is to really inventory these water rights and figure out where they fall in the priority system. And the idea behind that is senior rights have priority over junior rights in situations where, water might not be available. So we talked about groundwater and surface water. So in this state, any use of surface water requires a water right. Now there are some exceptions to that, but they're not super practical. But just an example of one is rain barrels. So water falling from the sky is surface water. It's waters of the state. You do not need a permit to use a rain barrel right now in the state. You don't need water right if you have a boat and you're sucking some water out of the ocean and running it through your reverse osmosis machine, But those are not big ones. Groundwater, some of that use is exempt. And the thought behind that was that when they extended the groundwater code to surface water, when they extended the surface water code to groundwater, they wanted to exclude some people so that not everybody had to go through the water right process. So the permit exemption, it's interesting. It's such a simple idea. It is generally the 5,000 gallon a day rule, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. It provides water for single domestic and group domestic supply up to 5,000 gallons. So if you've got a small trailer park, or you've got, a mother-in-law's home or some farm workers' homes, it's possible that you can have multiple homes all using a well, using less than 5,000 gallons a day, and being perfectly legal. The exemption also provides water for stock. So this is water that animals drink. This isn't water for like a feed yard or water for washing cows or for sanitation. This is stock water, so water for animals to drink. There is also an exemption for watering a non-commercial lawn and garden. So you could have, if you've got a little trailer park, you could have an outdoor play area, or you could have a great big garden and be using water for that in addition to the water you're using for your goats and your cows in your house. And there's also exemption for industrial purposes, and that includes all kinds of industrial stuff, whether it's a pickle factory, or whether you've got a small, a bonsai business where you're growing plants in a nursery, you can use 5,000 gallons for that as well. So just to provide a little more information, because this is a big one for people that don't have water rights and are relying on the permit exemption, the exemption is project-based. So you need to consider it's one exemption for the project. So you don't get to put in, multiple wells to serve many, many homes and call each one a separate project. If you've got a 40-home development, that's a project, and that's probably not exempt. The exemptions, however, can be stacked. And where this gets interesting is if you do have that hobby farm and you do have a big yard and garden and some housing for other people and, a little pickle farming operation, you may be able to be using more than 5,000 gallons. And that's something, I'm glad Robin talked about that, because there is definitely going to be a great off-ramp for the smallest users, but there's also the state's thinking about options, for people that are still exempt but are using more than 500 gallons, and that's all perfectly okay. And no paper, so you won't find a piece of paper, but you're still subject, to all the same, both privileges and obligations as any other water right holder. So, to talk about getting a water right permit, water right permits, water right certificates are a process, since 1917, if you start counting back in those decades, lots and lots of people have figured this out and applied and gone through the water right process. I can tell you it used to be a lot easier, 20 years ago than it is today. But water rights are something that are administered and issued by Ecology's regional offices. There's 4 of them, one in Lacey, one in Shoreline, one in Yakima, and Spokane. So that's where you file your water right application. Filing that application is what establishes a priority date. Currently, there's about 5,000 applications pending statewide, and it's just no secret. It's the rules have changed. It's very difficult to get a water right now. Most of those are not processed directly by Ecology. They're processed, by consultants, what's called cost reimbursement. And in many, many areas of the state, it is just not possible to get a new water right anymore. People do different things. It's possible for water right holders to modify existing water rights. It used to be, getting a water right was the way to go now. More people will file change applications and modify existing water rights, buy water rights. And the exception to this is situations where you can offset your consumptive use. So I never say never to getting a new water right, especially if there's something unique about your project and you can offset that water use somehow. But in most areas, it's just not likely you're going to get a new water right. This includes, the Nooks Act definitely includes one of them where we've got a lot of people using water already and a lot of other competing uses. 4-part test to get a water right, is it a beneficial use? Just about all uses are beneficial, from domestic supply to industrial uses. Is water available physically and legally? And the big one here again is legally, because again, in many areas, the state's already over appropriated and more water has been issued than could conceivably be fulfilled without impacting streams or other water users. Third one, will somebody be impaired? And that's kind of the flip side of, is it physically and legally available? If you're going to impact somebody else's ability to use water, or damage flows in a stream, then it's not legally and physically available, and it impairs. And finally, is there any perceived detriment to the public interest in issuing that water? So looks like an easy list, but it's a pretty heavy hurdle to try to get under. This is just really quick, kind of the stages. You file your application, which establishes your priority date. If things go well for you, you get a permit with a development schedule that allows you to put that water to use. Once you are using as much as you think you're going to be using and you've developed that water, you file what's called a proof of appropriation, and you let Ecology know, I'm done. This is how much water I'm using, and they will check that and make sure it's consistent and issue you that final water right certificate, which gets recorded and becomes a permanent property right. And then afterwards, it's still not over, because you still need to make sure to, that you protect that water. And there's really two main elements to that. The first one is staying in compliance, which is kind of knowing what your water right is for, and to the maximum extent possible to continuing to comply with it. If your water right designates the irrigation of 10 acres, you don't want to start irrigating more. You want to make sure that you're doing what the water right says. If it designates a well at a special location, a certain location, you want to keep using that well. And there are ways that you can modify water rights after they're issued, but you don't want to let it let it linger and have a use that, we switched wells 20 years ago and we don't know where the original well is anymore. Finally, you want to avoid relinquishment, because using water, you guys have probably heard the term use it or lose it. So relinquishment is what happens when you stop using a water right for 5 years without having a good reason. And that can be a partial relinquishment. You can lose part of it, or you can lose all of it. And these provisions are codified. They're in 9014. And the relinquishment law came about in 1967. So prior to 1967, relinquishment wasn't a thing. There were other ways you could lose water rights, but not through non-use. But since 1967, if you have a period of use where it's been over 5 years and you haven't been using the water, that water right is potentially gone or partially gone. And some of those exceptions, there's more of them. These are just a few of the most popular ones, but a big one is water unavailability. So if you've got a drought, and you haven't been able to get your full water right, but you've got all your infrastructure in place, but the water just hasn't been there, it's been 5 years. That's a water availability type issue. Legal proceedings, they need to be legal proceedings that are specifically keeping you from being able to use the water. Filing a change application, I mentioned that there's ways that you can modify your water rights. So in certain circumstances, if you can't use the water the way you've been using it, and you're in the process of trying to change that water use, that might stop that 5-year clock from ticking. There's also conservation programs where people voluntarily agree to stop irrigating for a certain period of time. Those are federal and state programs, and your water right can be protected during that period. For those with hydropower licenses, if you're continuing to pay your hydropower fees, your water right stays in good standing. There are also water rights that are standby reserve, and those are water rights that are maybe backup sources where you're not necessarily using them all the time. You might only use them every 10 years. And as long as you're continuing to use your primary source, you don't have to use your backup source. Future determined development. This is a big one. This one comes in when you stop using your water because your plan is to put that water to another use. And you have a definite plan where you're converting it and you're working on it. And the state recognizes that that water may not be used for 5 years while you're, converting to whatever this new use is. Municipal supply, water rights for public water systems that are the bigger public water systems do not lose water that they haven't used as long as they're growing into them and they are, up to, in good standing with the Department of Health. Agricultural processed water, so if you are, have a water right, but instead you're using your processed water, your water right is still protected. That's kind of like the standby reserve. And the big one is trust water, where you've taken that and you've identified, like, I'm not going to use that water, I won't need it for 10 years. But I want to protect it. You can put it into the state's trust water program, and you can do that on a temporary basis, voluntary temporary basis. I'm not going to use it for 10 years, but I might want it back. And so that's one of the other ways that you can kind of protect your water right from relinquishment. So that's pretty much all I have. That's like super fast water rights 101, and there'll be a test later. So you guys have to remember usufructory. Okay.
Thank you, Jill. That was excellent.
So moving on here in the program, I am Jay Chenault. I'm a principal hydrogeologist with Associated Earth Sciences. And I've got back-to-back talks here, so you got to put up with me twice in a row. This first talk is about water in Wire 1, so this is the science talk, so you'll have to deal with some of that for now.
Will you be showing polygons?
Polygons are the next talk.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, next two. Tyson's got polygons too. Sorry, Robin. Real basic information here. So this is a diagram from the USGS of the water cycle. So essentially all water that exists on Earth exists in some portion of this diagram here. So very basically, water is evaporated out of the oceans or other surface water, falls back to the Earth as precipitation, and then there are many paths back to the ocean or other surface water bodies within that cycle. So a water budget is essentially the quantification of the water cycle, so that the cartoon that we had before becomes part of this flow chart here. And a water budget calculation is represented by these terms here. Precipitation that falls on Earth is partitioned into this ET term, which is both evaporation off of surface waters and also transpiration by plants. Runoff represents both overland flow and shallow subsurface flow, termed interflow. So this is the surface water portion of the water budget. Groundwater recharge represents the groundwater portion of the water budget, and then the balancing term is the storage. So you can have water being stored in in different parts of this equation. So in terms of surface water in Wire 1, as Robin mentioned, Wire 1 does not just include the Nooksack watershed. It also includes these coastal drainages that flow directly out to Puget Sound. So creeks like California Creek and Dakota Creek are flowing out to Drayton Harbor. And these other coastal drainages, including Lake Whatcom, flow straight out to Puget Sound. Wire 1 also includes the Sumash drainage and portions of the Chilliwack drainage that flow north into Canada. And then, of course, the three forks, North Fork, Middle Fork, and South Fork, flowing into the main stem, Nooksack River, ultimately discharging to Puget Sound. So it's important to know that surface waters in Wire 1 are regulated by the 1985 in-stream flow rule. That can be found in Washington Administrative Code 173-501. Hopefully the colors show up okay here on the diagram, but what's important to note is all of these streams that are denoted in red are closed year-round to any new water use after 1985. So regardless of the flow in the stream, regardless of the time of year, there's no water available in any of these red streams for new out-of-stream uses after 1985. Other regulated streams in the basin include the Middle Fork and the main stem Nooksack River, which are regulated by an in-stream flow. And so these streams, according to the rule, water is available for new out-of-stream uses post-1985 when flows are above the levels as denoted in the rule. So oftentimes water rates can be granted post-1985 from theoretically from the Middle Fork and the main stem Nooksack. They're just subject to the in-stream flow. Oftentimes these are called interruptible water rights, where they can only be used, like I said, when the flows are high. Other regulated streams include the North Fork and the South Fork and some other lowland tributaries which are seasonally closed. So typically in the summer, these remain closed to new out-of-stream uses regardless of the flow in the summer, but in the winter, they're regulated by in-stream flow levels. So moving on to groundwater, start with a few basic definitions. So an aquifer is a rock or sediment formation. It could be a part of a geologic unit or a combination of several different geologic units. but the key factor here is that it's sufficiently permeable to transmit economic quantities of water to wells. So wells are drilled and completed in aquifers because they're permeable enough to be pumped and water goes to those wells. Confining units or aquatards are lower permeability units, so they can still store groundwater, they can still transmit groundwater, water can move through aquatards and confining units. It just happens very slowly, and so wells aren't typically completed in confining units. A few more definitions. An unconfined aquifer is often called a water table aquifer. These are typically shallow, where there's no confining unit above this aquifer, and so the water pressure in the aquifer is the same as what's in the atmosphere. A perched aquifer is a little bit of water sitting up in the unsaturated zone that holds water on top of a low permeability perching unit. And then a confined aquifer is typically a deeper aquifer below a confining unit, pressurizes the aquifer. This is where you get flowing artesian wells, where the pressure in the aquifer raises to this level that's called the potentiometric surface. And so when that is above the ground surface, you can have a well that's flowing. You don't have to pump it, it just flows out the top of the well. And also an artesian well where the water level in the well is pressurized, so it's above the point at which it was encountered in the aquifer, but remains below ground surface. And then I've always liked this diagram from the USGS about groundwater flow. So it's a nice little cartoon, shows an unconfined water table aquifer, a recharge area, groundwater flow towards discharge area, could be a stream, could be the ocean, and also groundwater flow passed down into deeper confined aquifers and still deeper confined aquifers. So what's important to note here is that there are many factors that dictate how water flows into these aquifers. Things like the hydraulic gradient and aquifer properties, how permeable the aquifer is. But the travel time can vary wildly, right? So if you have a location here near the stream in a shallow, unconfined aquifer, groundwater flow from that point to the stream could be in a matter of days. It can take years, it could take centuries, or even thousands of years for groundwater to flow along these flow paths from the recharge area to the discharge area. So in terms of WWIN, we'll be talking mostly about this area of northwestern Whatcom County where most of the groundwater use occurs. This is a graphic showing superficial geology within the domain of the Whatcom groundwater model, which we've been working with another consultant on developing over the course of the last 6 or 8 years. The important things to note here is superficial geology in western Whatcom County is really dominated by this purple unit, which is the Sumas glacial outwash. Very permeable deposit from the Sumas Glacier about 10,000 years ago, deposited this nice sand and gravel across much of western Whatcom County. The other common superficial unit, if you're up on one of the uplands, the Mountain View upland here west of Ferndale, boundary upland near Blaine, is you've got this low permeability silt and clay, it's this glacial marine drift deposit. So those are the primary units that we see at the ground surface. Below this superficial geologic units, you've got this thick sequence of both glacial and non-glacial deposits, up to 125,000 years ago, when those deposits were laid out. So in terms of hydrostratigraphy, those geologic units that we talked about can be simplified into 4 primary aquifers and 3 confining units. And so this is a map here showing the extent of what's called the Sumas aquifer. So much of western Whatcom County, beneath our feet, is groundwater within the Sumas aquifer. There is a few little shallow, I would call like perched aquifers up on the uplands that's part of this Sumas Epperson aquifer, not widely used. Most people who are using water around Blaine or in the Mountain View Upland area or in the Steer Creek area are drilling deeper into the Vashon Olympia aquifer, which is the next unit down. So this is a cross-section showing those hydrostratigraphic units in western Whatcom County. It's pretty similar to the cartoon we were showing earlier from the USGS of those confining units and aquifers. So we've got the Sumas aquifer, relatively thin, right at the ground surface, extends out across the valley. And then beneath the uplands, you've got this deeper Vashon Olympia aquifer below the confining unit, and then the deeper still possession with the aquifer.
Can you turn the lights off in front? It's almost impossible to see the slide.
Where's the lights? These lights are off. Yeah, I apologize about that. There. Is that helpful?
Would you post this presentation on your website?
Yeah, so probably not on my website, but it'll be posted on, I think we're talking about the WWIN project website and also the WWIN website. Is that better? Thank you. Good comment. Okay, so moving back to the Sumas aquifer, so this map here is showing groundwater flow directions within that largely unconfined superficial Sumas aquifer. These blue lines represent groundwater elevation contours, and the red arrows are groundwater flow directions. So you can see this area around California Creek, Dakota Creek, groundwater is flowing west towards Drayton Harbor and Birch Bay. Groundwater flow within the Nooksack Valley is mostly down valley, kind of similar to the flow of the Nooksack River. Groundwater north of the Nooksack River is flowing from Canada north down towards the Nooksack River. And then here, this purple line represents a groundwater divide. So you have groundwater coming from Canada down into Whatcom County that discharges as surface water to the Sumas River, which then flows back north into Canada. So it can get quite confusing, right? The Sumas aquifer, highly productive. There's some really productive wells within the Sumas aquifer, and I'll talk about it later, but about 97% of groundwater use within WWIN is from this Sumas aquifer. The deeper Vashon Olympia aquifer is confined. It's primarily utilized around Blaine and in the Mountain View upland area. Groundwater flow is kind of radially off the uplands, either out towards the valley or out towards Puget Sound. And then finally, the deepest, the possession with the aquifer, also confined. Groundwater flow is generally from northeast to southwest. There's not a lot of information on this aquifer. Wells completed in it are 600 to 1,000 feet deep, and so not a lot of people go that deep. The City of Blaine, Birch Bay Water and Sewer District utilize the possession with the aquifer as part of their water system up here. And the City of Ferndale has one well that's completed in the possession with the aquifer that they're utilizing for public water supply as well. So moving back to our kind of our water budget and the context within WWIN. So in terms of surface water and groundwater for the overall budget, about 80 to 90% of the water in WWIN exists within the surface water system. 10 to 20% of the water is down here in groundwater. The overall water use in WWIN, we're estimated about 5% of the total annual water budget. Of that water use, it's split about 40-60 between surface water and groundwater. And then, as I mentioned before, the groundwater use is really heavily weighted in the Sumas aquifer, with much less of the overall water use occurring from those deeper aquifers. So, there's the science. And then I think we'll just move right into this water rights research topic. So, Robin mentioned there's resources on Ecology's website to look to find, to see if you have a water right. our table back there, we've got some staff that are helping people find water rights as well. This demo will go through kind of the ecology system to find out if you have a water right on your parcel. We have a little different system that we've developed over there, but this is what's available to you at any point. So I go to this website all the time. I still don't have it bookmarked. I just Google ecology water rights search, and the first thing that comes up is what you're after. So you click on the Google search link, and it'll come to this web page, and then I'll have my, oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, right here is this link, right into this. The link is here, so click on water rights search, and it'll take you to this website. And like I said, the slides will be available. This will be a clickable link. Click on that. It'll take you right to this web page. And if you're better than me, you'll set a bookmark on your web browser so you can find it easily. I'm going to go through a little demo on like what I would do to find out if I had a water right on my property. But I would point you to this link here. There's these video clips that Ecology has put together on how to use all the tools within this search. I think there's 12 videos on the website there. They're 5 to 10 minutes long usually, and it'll take you through all the tools that are available to you on this search. But what I always do is I click on the map search, and it'll take you to the default water rights search, which looks like this. A couple of things to note here. There's a way to toggle the base map between the default topo map and an aerial photo. I like to look at things with an aerial photo. I find myself getting better oriented that way. And the default search is the search by water right, where if you know your water right document number or different facts, you can search that way. I always go down to this next one down, which is search by parcel, because that's usually the information I have. So if you do click on that search by parcel, it will come up with this menu. You can select Whatcom County, and then you can enter a parcel number here. You probably can't read that parcel number, but that's okay. I just put in a one that for demonstration purposes. And as you enter it in, you click the search button, it'll rezoom and highlight the parcel within Whatcom County that you searched. So this is a parcel here that's right along Weiser Lake Creek, and it'll pop up with a clickable link right down here for your parcel ID. So if you click on that parcel ID, what it will happen is it will resume for some reason and lose your highlighted parcel, but it will report out all water rights where a place of use overlaps the parcel that you searched for. So in this case, it returned 2 water rights claims and 2 water rights certificates where a portion of at least a portion of the place of use of that water right overlapped with the parcel that you searched for. Pretty useful. But as you look into it further, things get confusing. So some tips here. We've already selected our aerial map, so this is what it looks like in aerial view. And then you can go over to this next tab over, so instead of search options, you can go to the legend layer button. And you can turn on and off different layers so you can see what's going on. I like to turn on the townships and sections so I know where I'm at, and then I turn on the parcel boundaries. And then the previous search already told me that I've got claims and certificates associated with this parcel. If you kept all water right places of use on, there would be so many overlapping hash patterns that you wouldn't be able to tell what was going on. So I'm just looking at claims now, so I can see what claims the database associates with my parcel. So we'll zoom in here a little bit, so hopefully you can see what's going on. And so I've drawn in red the water right claim places of use that overlap my parcel. You remember this was my parcel here right along Weiser Lake Creek. So the first thing you might notice is that the parcel boundaries, the county parcel boundaries, don't correlate very well with the mapped places of use of these claims. So this is the easiest example right up here. So you've got a very distinct pattern of the water right place of use for this claim that it seems like it should match this cutout of this parcel, but it's offset a little bit. And the reason is, as Ecology developed a GIS system to digitize all of the places of use of these water rights based on legal descriptions in those water right files. They read the legal descriptions and digitized those places of use based on Whatcom County parcel database at that time, which the county has now updated their parcel database, and so there's this shift. There's this offset that has occurred between the parcel information and the water right places of use. So you end up with all these slivers of water right places of use that cover parcels now that when you use the parcel search will come up on your search. So this is a good example here from our parcel where it seems pretty clear that this claim is intended to cover this parcel to the north and west of Weiser Lake Creek. Because of the change in the parcel boundaries, it now covers my parcel, right? We can do our search on certificates, same idea. So we recall our parcel search came up with 2 certificates. One is here, pretty good coverage across my parcel and 4 of my neighbors. But our parcel search came up with 2. And that's because this certificate, place of use, with the offset now, covers this little slice of my parcel. So it comes up on the query. So we just have to be careful about that stuff when we're looking for water rights to cover our parcel. So here's my polygon. So one of the tools that you can use is this polygon tool. And I've limited my search. I know I've got certificates and claims to deal with, and so I can draw a polygon that is inset from my parcel boundary to eliminate those slivers, and click search, and then I end up with the two true water rights that are pertinent to my parcel are now found. So those are the steps that I go through when I'm looking at this stuff. So, oops, I'll go back up one more. So once you've got your water rights that you search for, there's this link down here. It says Open Record and WRTS. So if you click on that link, it will take you to a page that looks like this. Lots of information readily available to that water right. What I always go to is this upper right-hand corner. It says View Documents. You click on that, and it'll report what documents Ecology has available for that particular water right digitally, like electronically and available to download. So you can click on this Download Images, and you can download all of the water right documents that Ecology has on file for that water right. In this case, there's only a certificate. The certificate looks like this. It's pretty unusual for a water right file to contain only a certificate. You would expect an application, you would expect a permit, you would expect other documents associated with that water right. So in this case, I would contact Ecology and ask for a complete copy of the water right file. Ecology has paper files associated with all these water rights. Not all of those documents in the paper files are available to download through the system, so you can get everything you need for that file with that request. And the last thing I'll note is that this is, I wouldn't say more typical, but the other end of the spectrum. So when you click on View Documents for a water right, you could have an application, various levels of supporting documents, metering information, on and on and on. It's a pain to click through these each individually and download them. So click on this button, download the entire thing. In this case, it's 728 pages of documents associated with a single water right that Ecology has on file. If this is your water right, you will want to download all of that and figure out what's in it. So I think, yeah, that's the end for me. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? A little closer. A little bit closer. So good evening, my name is Tyson Carlson. I'm a hydrogeologist with Aspect Consulting. Appreciate everyone being out here tonight. Who feels like they're drinking from a fire hose a little bit? Yeah, well, that's not actually that bad. I guess while you're at it, it's always nice to get to know your audience a little bit. There's a lot of people here, I'm sure a very diverse set of people. How many people are here concerned about a well for their domestic house? Okay, that's good. How many people are here concerned about use beyond just their indoor domestic use, say a farm or a commercial, something like that? Okay. Thank you for that. And what I'm here today is talk about documenting your water use, and it can be very nuanced and it can be very scaled depending on what your use is. As Robin mentioned, if you are in a single domestic house and you think you use less than 500 gallons per day, that's one thing. If you use more than 5,000 gallons a day, or less than 500 more than 500 gallons a day and less than 5,000 gallons a day, that might be something else. If you move more than 5,000 gallons a day and you actually have a permit or certificate or claim, then what we're here today is to talk about how to document that water use. And really what this is trying to understand the how, what, why, when of your water use. That way you can put it on the claim form and have it available for use in the adjudication process. And so a little bit of repetition here just to emphasize some of the important points. For the non-exempt use, obtain the ecology file. Jay just went through that process. All of us are available to help with that. There's an ecology website that's available there. The next thing is interview the water user. Again, for a single domestic house, that might be one thing, but if you're getting into irrigated acreage, say that you're relatively new to the farm, or you have a foreman or a crop manager or a field manager, something like that, it's important to get real-world information about how the water is used on the farm. Another interesting thing is oftentimes it's difficult to determine how much water was used in the past. So a good starting point is to focus on the current water use, what you're using today, and then you can research and look backwards to try to get historic use. Interesting enough, like when we think about water rights, when it comes to a claim or a certificate, oftentimes and in the adjudication, you'll have to look backwards in order to determine your historic use and try to document that. If you're in a permit situation, you want to determine your current use and be able to extend that forward as you develop that permit into a certificate. And then for the next 2 points, they compare all water attributes and consider provision compliance. That's really the subject of a lot of what I want to talk about here in the next few slides. So this right here on the left-hand side, this is what they call adjudicated claim sheet. This was the piece of paper that came out of the Yakima adjudication that took roughly about 40 years. Hopefully this adjudication is not nearly as long as that, but the Yakima water right adjudication lasted for about 40 years. And they went through and marched through subbasin by subbasin, adjudicating only surface water rights. And at the end of that, they issued claim sheets like this in a document that basically described the who, what, when, where, why of a water right. The priority date, Jill talked about this, that's the date that the water was first beneficially put to use on your property. The source, and we're kind of looking down the list there, the source there, that's mainly, is it groundwater? Is it surface water? If it's a surface water, what tributary it is. The purpose of use, is it single domestic? Is it multiple domestic? Municipal? Industrial? Perhaps it's irrigation. There's a series of purposes of use that can be there. Period of use. When is it used? Is it a year-round use, like a municipal use or a multiple exemption? Or is it a seasonal use? For instance, irrigation. I want to skip the next one. I'll come back to that to just talk about the point of diversion and withdrawal. These are legal descriptions, or using township range and section, some description of where either your well is located or your diversion on, let's say, the main San Nooksack River. Place of use, this is the dreaded polygon comment again. This is the area of where the water is put to use. And then provisions. Provisions are very important to pay attention to when reviewing your water right. We're thinking about, proving your water use for the adjudication. These provisions can be, are there certain well completion requirements? Do you have to be in a certain aquifer? Are you dependent on, are you interruptible on in-stream flows? Is your water right dependent on another water right as, let's say, a non-additive, meaning it authorizes the same quantities, and you can only use one or the other. So I skipped the annual quantity and instantaneous quantity. When talking about the size, per se, of a water right, these are really the two numbers that we think of. The annual quantity is the cumulative volume of water that your water right authorizes over the course of the year. It's typically measured in acre feet. What is an acre foot? It's just like what it sounds. It's a 1 acre area of land with 1 foot of water on it. If you want to put it in gallons or milk jugs, it's 325, 851. So 325,000 gallons, 851. That's 1 acre foot. So your annual quantity is defined in multiples or a fraction of that. The instantaneous quantity is how fast you can withdraw that annual volume. So for groundwater, this is typically measured in gallons per minute. In surface water, this is typically in cubic feet per second. An analogy I like to use here is, think of a bucket. The annual quantity is how big your bucket is. The instantaneous quantity is how fast you can dump your bucket out. That's what defines your water right as far as numbers. So now in documenting and researching your water right, there's a couple of little tools we want to give you, or a couple of tricks of the trade, some things to think about. One very important thing, especially with irrigation, is how do you calculate your acreage? There's some really powerful tools out there on the internet. Even since I've made this slide, there is an update. Google Earth. If you just, if you Google Earth and download that tool, you can, for free, take in there and draw a square or a polygon or whatever it is around your field, around your lawn, around whatever it is, to try to determine the amount of acreage that is. If you need a little bit more advanced tools with that, there's something that one of my favorites, I've been using for years, is something called earthpoint.us. It's a subscription based, it's $50, but not only can you determine acreages, but also will give you a fairly reliable township range and section, and some other tools that help you for those of us that are computer challenged. It's really quite handy. Here, this is just some step-by-step, but we won't go through it right now, but it's just trying to give you a guide on how you can calculate acreage using some of these tools. And this is an example of kind of what it looks like. This is a water right just outside of Ellensburg. The red polygon, I'm sorry, I won't use the word, square is the defined place of use that was found in the adjudication. But this water right holder, their irrigated acres are in the yellow one. So what we're just trying to show is how you can outline your field here. Sometimes the irrigated acreage don't necessarily match the place of use. That's okay as long as it's within the boundary there. And there's reasons why this is. Usually it's due to passage of time. You can see there's a highway running through this field here. That highway, may have, the water use definitely was before the highway was there. Then the highway came in and cut that parcel and maybe chopped up the ownership a little bit. So historically, this was an 1883 water right that we're talking about here. Historically, that it was, it did irrigate that entire area. This is another more kind of oblong area. You can see here the blue, the place of use is in green, the irrigated acres in blue. This is a flood irrigation, so I'm just trying to show different irrigation techniques to where you can see the laterals there and running across the field. Little brown, little green. We'll talk about that here in a second. So a little bit, I go back to the bucket analogy and how we determine that QA, that acre foot number, or that instantaneous rate, the CFS. Gold standard, metering. It's a big N word. Not a lot of people like to talk about it, but the best thing you can do for your water right is meter your use. If you have a meter, and this is either a direct line meter on a well, or if you're on surface water, if you're on a surface water pump, it could be a meter, or it could be a weir, a staff gauge, something else. The best thing you can do is have a meter, use your water right, and I encourage everyone to get a little notebook, write in the rain something, and routinely go out there when you're using your water and write down the number. That is the best way to do it.
Government paid for our water meters and all that?
Well, let's talk about that in a second. So, I mean, it's the responsibility for the water users to be able to improve your water. I'm just saying that this is the gold standard to be able to use it, okay? But oftentimes, that's not available. More and more it is, but oftentimes when we're researching historic use, it's not available. So we like to fall back to something we call the multiple line of evidence approach. There are other ways that are out there to establish water use. One, aerial photographs if you're irrigation. It's pretty easy to measure the size of your field over time. And since the advent of Google Earth, aerial photos for the last 20 years are very readily available. Beyond that, you kind of have to dig back into some further archives, but they are available. Landsat imagery. There is a series of satellites that have been circling the Earth since the 1970s that routinely, over once a week, capture satellite imagery of the entire world, actually, the entire planet. And what it does is it's infrared, and what it'll do, and I'll show you an example in a second, is it's very easy to show when a crop or vegetation is evapotranspirating and when it's not. Another useful way of establishing water use capacity and runtime data. If you're a farmer, and let's say you have solid set sprinklers, and you run 12-hour sets once a week, and you have, every set has 100 sprinklers, and each sprinkler does 7 GPM. You can do the math and kind of determine how much water that would be. When you have a dedicated meter, electrical meter on one of your pumps, you can also use power meter data and call your local utility, request the data from that meter, and then using a procedure here that is written in rule in 173 Washington Administrative Code, you can do that calculation. It's a fairly simple calculation. Some assumptions need to be made on motor efficiency and pump efficiency, but again, with a little bit of help for those of you who can't do it, it's a pretty easy thing to do. Yeah? I'm sorry, I can't hear you, but I assume it's a little bit of echoing.
You want to come out to my place and you all have work on the property? Because you're not stopping on my property. You're not coming on.
Well, yeah. So the other ways we can establish water use, is using crop water use estimates. That is using things like the Washington Irrigation Guide and ecology policy to calculate what your water use may be. Other records include historic farm records. If you're a farmer and you've farmed that ground for, let's say, the last, several decades, and maybe have some records of hay sales or berry sales or whatever it may be, that's a useful thing. And the second one, I know Robin mentioned this before, it's been mentioned before, affidavits, to try to get statements from people either currently using the water or who have used it historically. So this may mean if your grandfather, he's getting on in years, and he has great knowledge of this, document in writing some of his observations from years past. So a couple examples here. This is aerial photography. You see the blue place of use with some fields in it. Notice that some of the fields look very green and some of them look a little brown and or cultivated. Let's take hay, for example. Right after you irrigate hay, it looks nice and green. You cut hay and then let it lay and bale it, and then before that hay really starts to grow again, it may look very brown in the picture. What's important to know is aerial photographers are just a snapshot in time. They don't represent the entire season's worth of use. They only represent what was happening at that time, and it's normal. It's frequent for aerial photos not to show strong, green all the time. One example here. This is Landsat data. You can see here the same place of use in blue. This is in August, by the way, and you can see the slight pink there. Well, that doesn't look super like it just got irrigated or anything, but just a few days, but a month earlier in July, you can see a bright red signature on here, which indicates it has been irrigated. That last picture just happened to be taken between irrigation of cuttings. So where do we get sources of evapotranspiration or those crop duties? There's lots of places. This is a whole presentation in of itself. I don't want to get into it, but if you guys have any questions, any of us are happy to answer this. These are all very useful resources for you guys to consider when trying to establish crop irrigation water duties. There are stations located all over the state, and these are examples of just some of them. And so with a little bit of research, this can be had. I believe this is This is from the Washington Irrigation Guide update. But it's also much like aerial photos to where you see the difference in signatures over the difference of times. There's limitations on the ET data too. So again, as a single domestic user, probably don't need to get in this level of detail. If you're an irrigator, it might be worth looking at these considerations just to make sure that you fully document your water use. Ecology has a couple policies and procedures. It's policy, procedure, guidance 1210. These are kind of the series of documents that are that kind of outlay the approved methods for determining some of these calculations. Again, each one of these are a full presentation. I just want to make sure you guys have these resources and can consider them. Oftentimes, one of the very important things to do with, if you're an irrigator, is to establish the irrigation efficiency of your system. Are you on micro spray, drip, wheel line, hand line, something like that, even a pivot? Each one of those systems and each system in itself has a different efficiency. And where the efficiency comes into play, there's a certain amount of water that a crop needs to evapotranspirate, and then there's an amount of water you need to apply to that crop in order to not only meet that evapotranspiration or that water you need, but also the evaporative losses that happen due to irrigation. The difference between there, that's the efficiency. So if you know the efficiency and you can determine your crop irrigation requirement, you can calculate your total irrigation requirement, which is the QA. That's the size of your bucket. That informs the size of your bucket fairly easily. The alternative is, and unfortunately this is a status quo because the data just does not exist when permit writers are trying to investigate a water right, is to determine the crop irrigation requirement and assume an irrigation efficiency. This is a table that is in Guidance 1210. And you can see the range of assumptions here. Your efficiency or your crop duties don't necessarily need to fall within these ranges, but if you fall outside these ranges, you got to have some sort of justification for some story. All we're trying to do here is give you the tools to tell a story in order to determine and document your water use. So estimated instantaneous rate. Everything I was talking about before was the size of the bucket. Now I'm trying to talk about how fast you're dumping the bucket out. There's a number of ways of doing that. Again, multiple line evidence approach. These things, pump curves. Every pump manufacturer has a curve that comes with a pump. And according to the total dynamic head, the TDH, and you can determine what is the ideal pumping rate of that pump. Irrigation system demands, we talked about that, just how many sprinklers are running at one time, maximum amount. What's important to understand is that an instantaneous rate is not the average rate you're using your water. It is the max instantaneous. So when you kick on that pump and it charges the system for, let's say a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, whatever is needed, that's your instantaneous rate. It's not the rate at which your sprinklers run for, let's say, the duration of their set. Sometimes you can use pumping test information to determine an instantaneous rate, depending on if you have a well situation. There's certain well logs that may help support your case. Neither one, the pumping test or the well log, maybe aren't sufficient in of themselves, but if you can show that your well can produce at least this much water, then that, again, helps tell the story. And then I already jumped ahead and talked about the instantaneous versus average rate. So now what to do with the unexpected? When you start trying to document your water use and try to tell that story, you'll probably find some inconsistencies, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, it's about beneficial use. Sometimes things that we affectionately call coloring outside the lines of some of the water right attributes, that's okay, as long as you're using the water beneficially. So what happens if a provision isn't met? What happens if some changes have occurred over time? And what happens if property ownership changed? Those are all questions that need to be identified, and there are tools available to address those, and I believe Andy's going to talk about those next. Just as an example, you want to fix what you can. Let's say this is something that happens all too often. What happens if a water right allows 40 acres to be irrigated? And 40 acres are irrigated. You can show that through the various means that we just talked about. But 5 are outside that place of use, that dreaded polygon there. Some of it's out there. again, that's okay. That's considered what ecology refers to as a de facto change. But you might want to consider changing the place of use and updating that to include that area outside the place of use. Another example, property ownership. What happens if the water right that you own allows irrigation of 100 acres, but you only own 20 of those acres? You might want to consider administrative division to subdivide the water right and any other changes that might need to be done as far as place of use. So if I were to sum up just things to think about for you guys, this is really water right management 101. As Jill said, that once you have a water right, the adventure's just beginning, it's not ending. Water right, and especially if you have a water right portfolio, needs care and feeding. You need to check into it. You need to make sure it's maintained. And so at first you need to know what that is. You need to know what your water right portfolio consists of. You need to know your water use, what we just talked about documenting that water use. You need to make sure that your water use authorization it matches how you physically use the water. You want to make sure to avoid relinquishment, what Jill said. You want to make sure that your water is fully used and documented at least once in a rolling 5-year period. And if it's not used, you want to consider steps to protect that water, such as a temporary donation or one of the other relinquishment exemptions Joe spoke about. And then finally, it's really important, especially in a water-short basin, to know what your water rights are worth. So one of these things that you can do is, consider confidential water use assessment. I think that was some of the comments in the back there. These are steps taken to document all this use and really try to tell a good story so you understand what your water rights are and what they are not going into the adjudication. So with that, that's all I have.
All right, last organized talk here. We got 15 minutes. We're going to make it, everyone. We're going to make it. So I'm going to touch on, again, my name is Andy Dunn with RH2 Engineering. I'm going to touch on some administrative tools and water right changes and transfers that can be done before the adjudication even starts to kind of clean up that record, make the actual water use match the water right documents or vice versa. So for the administrative tools, Tyson hit on these a little bit, but I'm going to talk about administrative splits, documenting permit ownership, showing compliance, which is if you're drilling a new or an additional well under an existing water right, and then finally also claim amendment. It's a little less well-known way to amend a water or change a water right claim based on maybe facts that were incorrect on the original claim document. So administrative split is a way that you can voluntarily divide up a water right between multiple property owners. And this is what the form looks like, and there's a link there, so when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click right on that to go to this particular form. The point of it is to, like I said, you have a water right that covers a certain area. Maybe back in the day it was 40 acres, that was one property, but now it's been subdivided into 4 10s. Now 4 people own property within that place of use. Ecology is going to consider if this is a certificate or a claim that those 4 property owners are joint owners of that water right. So there might be instances when you say, hey, I'd like to own my portion by myself. I don't want to necessarily jointly own with my neighbors. So in doing that, you need to get together with those other folks that are within the place of use, and you need to decide how you're going to split that water right up. So you need to decide, okay, what part of the place of use is each person going to own? How much of the instantaneous rate and annual volume are going to be attributed to each particular property? And if it's irrigation water right, how many irrigated acres are going to go along with each property? So here's a couple examples. The purple box is going to be your water right place of use. We're going to assume this is a certificate or a claim. So now the certificate has 2 wells, which are those little circles there. So the certificate has 2 wells. It includes, we'll say this is an 80-acre area, and it's for irrigation of 80 acres. And the annual volume, which is often, the water duty is 2 feet per acre, so the annual volume is 160 acre-feet per year. But sometime in the past, the water right, or the property was split, and now the water right place of use is owned by the Smith and Jones. So in this particular case, hopefully they're friendly neighbors. This is a pretty easy split. You can get together, each one of them. In the end, the certificate will be split into an A and a B portion. And so with that split, each property owner will have 1 point of withdrawal, the one that's on their property there. They will each have a place of use that includes their property. The number of irrigated acres will be split evenly, 40 acres per property, along with the instantaneous rate and the annual volume. So that's an example of a very, very easy split. Why you want to do that is because once you do that, then you have full control over your water right. If you don't do that, then you are joint owners with your neighbor. And so if Mr. Brown wants to do seasonally irrigate potatoes, let's say, and Mr. Jones wants to allow him to use his 40 acres for irrigation of his potatoes, Mr. Jones would have to go get Mr. Smith's signature before that seasonal change application could even be filed with Ecology. So Ecology is going to require everyone that's within that water right place of use to sign that application before it gets changed to allow Mr. Brown to irrigate for that one season. And that's just to protect the property rights of the water right holders. So if you do the split, then Mr. Jones can just work with Mr. Brown directly. He doesn't have to involve the other, the person that used to be within the place of use but now is not. So more complex, and unfortunately this seems to be the case more often than not. In this particular case, there was 1 point of withdrawal, one well. It's located on Mr. Smith's property now. The place of use is the same purple, which we're going to say is 80 acres. But on the water right document itself, the certificate was only for 40 acres of irrigation. So maybe back in the day, there was ground that was not irrigated, maybe it was forest. But now maybe the entire 80 acres is being irrigated. So you have a situation where maybe more acres are being irrigated than the water right allows. And so now these two folks have to decide, okay, how is it appropriate to split up that water right? Are you each going to take half? That means you can only irrigate half your property. And if you've been irrigating the full property, then that's definitely a change in issue. So in this particular case, this is a lot more complicated, but you got to, it's going to be up to you, I guess, working that out with your neighbor at this point. And so that's an example of an administrative split. So applications and permits, when Jill was talking about the different stages of water rights, applications and permits are considered to be personal property. So the name on that document is the owner of that application or permit, even if that permit is attached to ground that you own. So that's different. Certificates and claims, they attach to the ground that they're used on or that's within the place of use. So if you sell property with a certificate on it, the certificate is automatically assumed to transfer with that property. If you buy property with a permit on it, you also have to get that permit assigned over to you. So with applications and permits, there is a assignment form that allows you to identify to Ecology who is the owner of that application or permit. And this is going to need, whoever the original person was and then whoever the new person is. So this is just a form that you can fill out to inform the Department of Ecology who owns that particular document. And it's going to be very similar to the split form. You can do it in full, the whole application, the whole permit goes, or it can be split. And so in doing that, you're going to have to decide, irrigated acres, instantaneous rate, annual volume, how are those split between the different parties. And then these have to be signed in front of a notary. You need to make sure that whoever's name's on the application is actually the person that is assigning ownership of all or a portion of those documents to this new person. And then drilling additional or replacement wells. So there is a way in the code that if you have a water right permit or certificate, if you need to drill an additional or replacement well, and that could be because maybe your well production is not as good as it used to be, or your well completely collapses, you can do this without having to go through the water right change application process. So we always recommend this first. It's easy, it's simple, it's quick, it does not need to involve one of us, so it saves you a ton of money. You just need to make sure that you know that the newer replacement well that you're going to add is located within the place of use, or the same legal description, identified on your public notice. So back when your application was originally filed, you put a public notice in the newspaper. I don't know if you've seen those. Most people I know do not read through the public notice section of the newspaper looking for water right public notices. But they will, when you get your full water right file, like Jay described, you'll see something in there like this. And this is the legal notice for this particular water right. And so in this water right application, they identified that they're going to withdraw groundwater from a well situated in the northeast and the northwest border of Section 4. So that would be this 40-acre area here. So if you are going to come along and drill an additional replacement well, if you do it within that same advertised legal description, you can do that, and then you just file the, you submit this form right here along with a copy of the well log, and then it automatically gets added to your water right file. So that's a great way, again, to get your, what's happening in actuality to match up with your water right documents. So claim amendment. This is something that's a little bit more obscure, but I think it's important with an adjudication on the horizon. As Jill mentioned, claims were documents that were filed by water users, typically in 1974 all the way through maybe like 1998, in which they filled out a form and sent it into the state saying, hey, I have water use and I want to document it with the state. So there was nobody double checking, do these rates make sense? Do these volumes make sense? Those forms were just filed and they were put in the water right files. There was no double checking or kind of QA, QC. And so this amendment to a claim form comes in when you find ministerial errors in your water right claim. And so ministerial errors can be as simple as a typo. Oh, I meant the northwest of the northwest, not the northwest of the northeast. So this is where it's very important to get your water right document, take a look at it, make sure you understand the information that's on it and how it compares with your actual water use. So I've seen instances where ecology has amended claims for the estimation of annual volume. There was a claim that was filed for 140 acres of irrigation, and it claimed 2 acre-feet of water use. 2 acre-feet is not nearly enough to irrigate 140 acres. However, 2-foot water duty is the common water duty that's issued in Western Washington. So they filed a claim amendment, say, I didn't understand the question. I meant 2 feet per acre, and the claim was amended to now be 280 acre-feet of water for that 140 acre irrigation claim. So it's important to get that cleared up ahead of time before you then go to the adjudication court and say, yeah, this is my water right authorization and this is what it authorizes. Other things are directional or just typos and other errors. So look at that claim form if you do have a water right claim and just double check it, map it out, make sure you understand its attributes, and make sure it makes sense. And ecology has a guidance on claim amendments. It's like I said, pretty minimal. You can't go in there and wholesale change everything, and you have to have evidence for whatever change you are requesting. But there is guidance there, and it is a way that you can amend your existing water right claims if errors were made when that was filed. So water right change applications, this is when you have a water right but you need to change it. Similar to what Tyson was discussing, if you're irrigating maybe 5 acres outside of your place of use but it's still within your water right, you're still beneficially using that water. You can generally change point of withdrawal or point of diversion, where your well is located, place of use, where your water is used, and also purpose of use. So are you going from industrial to municipal, let's say. Things you generally cannot change are the priority date, which is the date of first use of the water right. You can't make that much older than it says. You can't change the pumping rate or the annual volume. You can't change sources, so if you have a water right from the Sumas River, you cannot change that water right to now pull out of the Nooksack River, because then you're jumping into different bodies of water there. And finally, provisions. If you have an interruptible water right that is provisioned to the Nooksack River in-stream flows, you can't change the water right to remove that provision and make that water right, we'll say, better, because it would be non-interruptible. And so water right change applications, and this is where we get the majority of our experience. In order to get a water right change application processed by ecology, you have to demonstrate that that water right is still valid, that it has not relinquished. And so we put together documents that look at, okay, what has the water right, or what has the water use been as compared to the water right from 1967 to present. And that amount of water is what can be changed. So it's very similar to, I believe, what the adjudication will be. A similar sort of analysis on how much that water right is in good standing and remains valid through time, regardless of relinquishment or even how much is being used today. So water right change applications, if you do have something that you want to try to clear up before the adjudication begins, the only way to have a change application processed is through the cost reimbursement program. And this is a program through the Department of Ecology where a consultant, I'll show a list of the 8 qualifying consultant firms. They can basically process a water right application on Ecology's behalf. Ecology has final review of that, but it's a way that you can get an application processed, I'll say in a reasonable amount of time. Timeline is a minimum of a year. Water rights are glacial. They take a long time to make things, get through the process. So minimum is going to be a year, and the cost it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be minimum like $10,000 or so. So that just provides you with a little eye-opening of what it would be like to do a water right change application through the cost reimbursement process. So with cost reimbursement, you are paying for a decision. You're not paying for an approval necessarily. So that's very important. Through that process, you still need to be able to meet all the legal bars that Ecology would have to meet by itself. And so you don't want to go into it with a water right that has bad history or bad facts, or you want to know what you're going to be able to get through that process even before you start. And so cost reimbursement, you're using a consultant from Ecology's pool. The consultant's under contract with you directly, and then you will enter into a cost reimbursement agreement with Ecology. The consultant then processes the change application. Ecology reviews that, and you're paying for all that time. And so consultants in the cost reimbursement pool are these 8 listed here. If you do run into wanting to do a change application through that process. And that is it. We are done with scheduled presentations. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience. We're going to open it up for questions. Questions can be asked of the panel, and